Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Co-opcast, your premium broadcast network here at UCHA. Welcome to this week's episode. It is currently March 15th. This should be published by the 18th, so, we're on our way through spring quarter. And today I am interviewing Sal Vazquez, who grew up as an LA local native. He grew up in Silver Lake. What he's doing here, he is a fifth year PhD student in the Graduate School of Education, and specifically in the Division of Human Development and Psychology. And in terms of his role at the co-op, Sal is the current assignment manager. So he oversees all of our chore shifts and is crucial in ensuring that this wonderful place functions on a daily basis. Welcome, Sal.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll just jump right into your questions. I guess I'm really interested in hearing about what attracted you to your current spot in the field of education. I know I learned recently you have a passion for teaching, but you're a doctoral candidate in researching cognitive and social precursors to learning and motivation. So I'm just really curious, what made you want to dive into such a specific topic, to the point of presumably becoming an expert on it as a doctoral candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there were a lot of elements like throughout my life that sort of contributed to like my interests. But when I started undergrad as here at UCLA as well, I was an undergraduate at UCLA. I didn't really know that this is what I was going to end up doing. I came in, I think like many typical undergrads, like, oh, I'm going to go pre-med and I'm going to become a doctor. Even though I came in undeclared, that was my intention. But to be honest, I hated chemistry. So I needed to find another route to get to sort of the things that interested me. And one of those things was just studying the human brain, the human mind. And I realized I could do that through psychology. So I was a psych undergrad. And then I had an awesome opportunity as an undergrad in the psych department at UCLA through the PROPS program, which is still in existence, I believe. And it's essentially a training program for how to get into graduate school in psychology. And along with that, you usually get like a $2,000 stipend, and you have to find a researcher on campus to work in their lab and learn how to do research firsthand through, the apprenticeship model.
Right.
So that was really my first exposure to all of that. And in doing work with my first advisor, who's Dr. Christia Spears-Brown, who's now at the University of Kentucky, I really started to engage with like questions around education, because we were doing research at schools in El Segundo, which is not too far from here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really started to like realize that I could put together a lot of questions I had about learning and just things that happen in school in general with psychology. And then later on, sort of picking up on the fact that I can combine this with my real interest in like how the human brain operates by also throwing in like some elements of neuroscience into my work.
Yeah, it's funny that you sort of made that that you sort of mentioned the juxtaposition of those two sides of academia, because I think when we like chatted online briefly beforehand, when I was just sort of trying to get an idea of things that you were into, I was really
Right.
intrigued by the fact that you said that you were studying brain waves. So something that to me sounds like inherently so biological, but
Right.
also it's like you're studying such like social implications, such real world effects, it seems. So yeah, I mean, I
Mm.
was really intrigued by that, and I'm definitely going to ask you about it in more detail later, but I'm glad that you sort of found a field and a department that that can encompass both of those worlds for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, a journey. It's funny because I think I remember like, hearing other people in the field of academia talk about like their trajectory and how they got there. And I feel like almost nearly 100% of the time, it always begins with like, well, I didn't originally plan this. So here's how it happened. But I think, we all have sort of goals in mind. And, you know, I think the best way to make goals is to be very specific about them. But in reality, I think oftentimes our goals are somewhat vague. Like we sort of have an idea of like where we want to go or sort of around what area we want to do some sort of work. And I think as long as we keep that in mind, we sort of end up there, as long as we keep taking the steps, the proactive steps that we feel move us in that direction.
That kind of sort of pairs well with a next question I have for you. So again, like, we talked about just the dichotomy between, the strict biological sense and then the social implications that the
Right.
social factors that you study, which, I guess would inherently have implications in the real world. So it's my understanding that a significant portion of your research considers social factors and how they can affect students' ability to like maintain cognitive control while faced with difficult learning tasks like testing or any other high pressure academic situation with like, which, I think as students we're all so familiar with. So I guess, yeah, what I want to get into next is like, if you have any thoughts about, yeah, like the implications of your research in the real world and why, and if you were thinking about those implications and if those implications were at all the reason for which you were so passionate about the questions that you're trying to answer, in such a longitudinal way.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot.
I'm sorry, I know that's
No, I mean, just, I could probably speak over an hour on that alone. I think going back to your original statement about sort of this dichotomy between the biological and the social, I think it's very easy for people to view it that way, but in my work and sort of from my perspective is they're really not separate at all.
Okay.
They definitely influence each other. Like we're all social beings and we operate in social environments and situations. And all of those situations, all of the things that we encounter, whether it's socializing with people or even like reading a book, which in essence is socializing with somebody had to write it. Those are all types of experiences that affect like our neurobiology. It wasn't not too long ago that we didn't know that the brain was a very plastic organ. And by plastic, I mean that it changes, it can change. And so all the experiences that we have are constantly changing, the way our brain operates in essence. So when I look at the biological with the social, it's under that assumption that whatever experiences an individual has in their real life is affecting how their brain operates. And I think I mentioned to you like that description of my research is actually very broad because you could say that about a lot of things. And it's somewhat purposefully stated that way because like my research interests are very broad. Like I approach my research from a very interdisciplinary perspective. I include elements of education, psychology and neuroscience. And not only that, but I methodologically, I also open to using whatever method is best to answer my questions. So, this ultimately involves having to be open to not just quantitative methods, which we often refer to as statistics, but also qualitative methods such as interviews and analyzing text, or, sometimes when I do research with kids and their homework, it's like, I don't just ask them questions, I also take copies of their homework assignments and analyze them to see what is it that I can gather from that, that piece of assignment, that assignment that they received that night from their teacher. But to also give you a sense of just how broad my interests are, it's just like my first I guess you could say my first study was looking at teacher and parent encouragement and how that affected student performance in school. Um, then I've done other studies looking at parental involvement with math homework, and especially around the issue of struggle, or what I refer to as productive struggle. So this idea that struggle is a necessary component of learning. And it's
Mm,
backed by a lot of research in cognitive psychology, which shows that difficult tasks often lead to long-term memory and better understanding. So you can see where elements of the cognition, like how people think, intersects with the social aspect of psychology, which is, like parents' education level, socioeconomic status, or race and ethnicity. All of those things have an impact on the resources that parents bring to their children. And therefore, those resources then have an impact on their children's ability or exposure to different methods of learning, or how many books are available, or how many vocabulary words that they're exposed to throughout their life.
yeah.
All of those things interact with the brain, and especially at a very early age, um, and leads to a lot of the effects that we see in this type of work, where children who are in low resourced areas are more likely to have poor academic performance throughout their life. So there's a lot, and I don't actually remember all the questions you asked me now, but it's just sort of this very holistic view of how we learn, and how we're motivated. That's really what I like to focus on, is this assumption that everything is related to everything.
Mhm.
And you can study things in isolation, but that's only going to get you so far. And when you're really trying to look for that real world, um, like the effect it has in the real world, or trying to find an intervention, or trying to work within the realm of like applied science, like I feel like you really do need to take that holistic approach.
You're right in saying that a lot of people think of those two sides of that coin as a dichotomy, whereas you're
Mhm.
saying, you find it much more beneficial to see them as very much intertwining. I'm curious, what is the relationship between this academic research and what it produces, and then the everyday teachers that are teaching in schools, are inspiring kids to want to pursue academia or any
Yeah,
interest. Do you think that relationship, how does it, I mean, do you think that it works well? Do you think that it could be improved upon? I guess in short, what could the benefits of what you research, how could they be implemented into the real world that would make
right.
education in this country better writ large?
Yeah. I mean, just to be simple about it, like my research really doesn't benefit anyone unless it gets disseminated, like
Right. Okay. Yeah.
distributed to people, for it to be read. And as researchers, we don't really do that very well, I would say. I think oftentimes we're very focused on our questions and finding the answers, and publishing it, and then we stop.
Mhm.
Um, but it is one of my goals to sort of change the format. Like, instead of like, you know, of course the end user is always going to be another researcher. Like, that's already a given in a lot of the work that I do, and my colleagues as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm really less concerned about the work getting to them, and more concerned about it getting to the people who need it, just
Mhm.
like you said, teachers or even parents. So there are other great ways to do that, through Twitter, or through other forms of social media. You can also consult with schools, write books.
Mhm.
A lot of the great researchers end up writing some form of like pop psych book, that it allows them to distribute their work to a bunch of people who aren't necessarily out there looking for it, but when they see it in front of them, they're like, oh, okay, this is interesting, I want to learn more about it. um more specifically to your question about the connection between like the work being done in academia and the teachers who would be the ones applying it, it varies. It really does. Like, there are some districts that are really good about this, uh, connecting the research to the practitioners who are the teachers. There, some universities do a really good job at that, especially if they have teacher training programs on campus. Um, there are some schools, like for example, the KIPP charter schools, who, really, when they first started, at least, I'm not entirely sure about what their methods are now, but I'm guessing they're pretty similar. Um, they were very innovative in using research-based approaches that, such as, constantly evaluating teachers and making sure that they got feedback all the time. Um,
From
and
whom? The students, the parents, everyone?
other
I
faculty,
Other
yeah,
faculty, I see, okay.
and administration,
Mhm,
um, as well as just, really like thinking about like what is it that the students need in order to be engaged, in order to feel like they belong. And a lot of that involved just creating a lot of social connections with the parents of the students. And those are things that, obviously teachers are very busy and can't always do, but it at least seems from what's out there and what's been done, that trying to like bring the family into the school, and not just asking them to come, but actually going out and getting to visit them and see them, really does have an impact on students' like sense of engagement and belonging, which can go a long ways towards getting them actually interested in doing their work and learning. Um, I think oftentimes when we're trying to get students engaged in school, it's really not very complicated. There are a lot of simple solutions out there, but they're simple in in what they involve, but not simple in execution. They take time, it takes effort, and oftentimes the way our teachers are being paid, they're not being paid for this time. So it's often, if a teacher's going to do these things, it's volunteer time. And they're people too. They have families and they have other things to do as well. So we really can't expect that of them all the time. So, this gets into the larger issue of just like how education is treated as a whole in this country. And even then you can talk about it at that level because it varies from state to state and from district to district. It's a very fragmented system. And there's a lot of variation. So with that, I would say there's also a lot of variation in how research gets to teachers.
And then, there's the whole like, I think, what I would presume is more of a cultural or zeitgeist issue, just about the fact that teachers don't deserve, or that, I guess I should say rather, that like in other countries, that being a school teacher is so like, looked up to, and they get
Right.
sufficient salary,
Right. Yeah, it's one of those professions that has a lot of like virtue signaling attached to it, I believe. Like people say like, oh yeah, teachers, they're like our heroes, like we should pay them more, but then nobody ever actually does anything about it. So yeah, there's definitely that sort of like, everybody agrees, that we need them and they need to be paid more, but then no one's really out there doing much about that or getting it done.
Yeah, and it seems like that's where you need, that's where you need the paradigm shift to happen, but then, it's extremely hard to implement that,
Yeah.
especially in such a, like you said, it's such a fragmented uh, you know, realm of our lives.
Yeah.
But yeah, so speaking of these like real world implications, for you personally,
Hmm.
what do you see yourself, if any, if you have an idea, what do you see yourself doing after research? Do you want to be in the classroom at any point?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Like, yeah, I have an idea of what I want to do. I feel very comfortable in academia.
Hmm.
So I like doing research. I like writing my manuscripts. I like talking about it, obviously. Um, but so yeah, ideally, I think initially I would like to work at a university as a professor where I get to do research and teach and mentor other students who want to do similar work as me. Um, I don't know if that'll be my career forever though. Um, you know, our generation really has to get used to the idea that we're most likely not going to have just one career.
Hmm.
We're going to have multiple careers or multiple jobs throughout our lifetime. So, so I'm also interested in either working in government, doing research at that level, and at any level of government. It could be district level, it could be state level or federal level. Um, I think being so close to where the policy is being made is also somewhat advantageous, especially with a scientific background that like the one that I have,
Hmm.
because not everyone at that level has that scientific background.
Are
Um,
you referencing Washington, D.C.?
just any like, well, you know, decisions about our schools are being made at the state level, they're being
Yeah.
made at the federal level. I mean, I think at the federal level they do a better job at this because they definitely have the Department of Education has like subsectors, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
that specifically focus on research. Um, and I believe there's also at the state level in most states as well. But the people who are usually the ones making the decisions about the policies that get enacted, and though they're not necessarily always, you know, they don't always have the scientific background, so they're dependent on advisors usually or people writing reports for them.
Makes sense.
And you know, it those reports carry a lot of weight when they're reading them and then deciding whether or not to create a bill around it or to, you know, whatever else needs to be done in order to make some changes at a, you know, more widely. So I thought about that as well. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, all those people I've always heard give this sort of talk is like, well, I didn't always plan to end up here. So I don't know where I'm going to end up exactly. Private sector is also really nice, you
Hmm.
know, especially considering the work that I do with like looking at brainwave activity and EEG electrodes. Um, you know, Google is doing that research. Who knows? Probably Apple is too. You know, they have with their watch and their fitness approach towards technology lately. There's a lot of uh, companies in the private sector who are doing this kind of work, and we just don't know about it.
Hmm.
And they rely on people with PhDs to conduct this research. It's done at a different pace. It doesn't always get published, but it is still very much reliant on the skill set of you know, people with PhDs in either psychology or education or other similar fields.
Yeah, it seems like I'm having like a vicarious fulfillment through you, just like thinking about how important all of this stuff is, you know, for all of us. Because you know, I truly like think that, I mean, I'm probably stating the obvious, but just that like
Mhm.
education is just like the key to everything. To And when I say everything, I mean solving a lot of the world's problems that we're all experiencing right now. I just think it's so
Yeah,
important.
it's actually weird because I think it does play a big role, but I also think there are a lot of other issues that could actually solve the problems we see in education. So like,
Absolutely.
you know, like something that I often will like sort of end my classes with is if I have the opportunity is to tell students, you know, that, you know, studying this stuff is important. We need to learn more about it, but we could probably eliminate most of it if we just had like universal health care, pre-K, daycare and pre-K for like everyone who needed it, and like universal maternity and paternity leave. Like those three things alone could probably solve a lot of the issues that we see in education, especially around socioeconomic status. Race and ethnicity issues, there are a lot of confounds between that and socioeconomic status as well. They're often intertwined with each other.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to the issues about having wealth and the resources necessary to be able to do just the basic things in one's life, like being able to go to work without worrying who's going to take care of your children, those things can have really far-reaching effects on the lives of families, which then translates into the education of their children, which then translates to their future prospects at work and whatnot. Like I said, it's all interconnected.
Yeah, like it's interesting. It seems to go back and forth. Like I started by saying education could solve the world's problems, but also, like you said, the world, solving the world's problems would make education so much better, and therefore would help us. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
how it works.
and people often think these issues are political, and we've politicized them, but in reality, like they're far more than that. I believe they're like essential.
They're humanitarian issues.
Yeah, exactly. They're essential to our daily lives now. And, if technology continues going at the current rate, other things are going to become essential too eventually, like universal basic income, because there's going to be a lot of people without jobs, or we're going to have to become more creative about the work that we do. And you're going to see a lot more people probably becoming somewhat entrepreneurial and trying to create stuff that they can do and sell to consumers so that they can make a living, because those manufacturing jobs and even to a certain extent in the future, farming jobs and whatnot, like that stuff's going to be going away.
Yeah, inevitably.
Yeah.
And then like how would those absence of jobs influence what we need to be educating people about instead? That's a whole other conversation though.
I mean, there's this weird effect known as the Flynn effect, and essentially it's this like documented effect of like IQs, like people's IQ increasing over generations. And I think recently there was a paper published that it decreased for the first time in like a while.
Wow.
which is not great, but I think one of the reasons why we see increasing IQ, even though I don't necessarily think IQ is the greatest measure ever created, one of the reasons why we do see this increasing over time is because as technology becomes more advanced, it also becomes more complicated, and it requires more cognitive ability, more cognitive resources, more cognitive skills. I mean, just simply, for instance, I think if you were to go back in time and show an iPhone as they're made today to somebody in the 80s, they'd probably be wondering, like, where are all the buttons? How do you operate this thing?
Yeah, they would absolutely have no idea.
You wouldn't know that. And even that simple intuition of knowing how these devices operate and that it's a possibility to press on a clean glass surface and see something happen, like there's an effect from that, just requires a whole new way of thinking that has an impact on how we approach other problems and other aspects of our lives. Like there's studies with maybe it's not a study, maybe it's just anecdotes that I've heard where they'll give toddlers a magazine and they try to operate it like an iPad. So it really becomes ingrained in us. And now we have generations of people growing up who don't know what life was like without the internet. So we're really going to start seeing more, I think, drastic changes in how people think and how creative they can be and whatnot, because it's just simply an outcome of how our society is transitioning or evolving.
Yeah, dang, that's it's really quite a magnitude of an effect. And yeah, like I said, I just feel like that could be a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you one thing,
Yeah.
uh, not related to work, but okay. So as someone who is very ignorant to sci-fi because I've just
Right.
been boring and I've never exposed myself to it, I fully admit to that. But so my question for you as a lover of Star Wars,
Hmm.
if you were to convince me why I should watch the entire series, like why should I watch Star Wars?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I actually don't really consider Star Wars sci-fi. I consider Star Wars to be fantasy.
Okay.
There are plenty of people who would disagree with me on that, or
Mhm.
I would be willing to say like it's obviously a hybrid of both.
Okay.
Um, but um, so yeah, why should you see it? I mean,
Why is it worth my time?
right. I mean, okay, I'll give you the practical and I guess the less practical reason. The less practical reason is just that you might enjoy it. It might
Mhm.
be fun and you'll you'll have something else that you like and you can share with others.
Mhm.
The more practical reason is that it's such a huge element of our popular culture that to not even know or have seen Star Wars is just like having this huge gap in knowledge, I feel.
It's true.
So yeah, so I feel like, I mean, you can't even watch Family Guy and catch Star Wars references without watching Star Wars. It's just
Mhm.
like it's everywhere.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say the more practical reason to watch Star Wars is because it's such a huge part of our culture.
Mhm.
But I think what separates the fantasy of Star Wars from science fiction sometimes is that I think science fiction often just tackles more pertinent societal issues. Um, you know, like just going back to, I guess the most used example with Star Trek is, the original series was, having Uhura, like the first black female on TV to kiss a white male cast member.
Wow, I had no
That was,
idea.
yeah, that was like, it was such a big deal back then to show this like interracial romantic scene on television. And that's obviously something that other shows weren't doing. And maybe they were able to like, get away with it because it was a science fiction TV series that, not necessarily everybody took seriously, but it broke ground and
Mhm.
it led to other changes on television and in our, you know, cultural modes of telling stories at the time. And I think sci-fi often serves uh, a very good role as allegory. Like it could
Mhm.
tell a lot about actual societal issues um, through, through these stories that you can enjoy, but at the same time definitely dissect and learn more about. Star Wars, on the other hand, I feel like it's just fun. It's like
Mhm.
Game of Thrones. It's just seeing something fun happen. You can argue about it. You can like, um, you know, create your theories around what, where did, you know, they get that lightsaber or whatnot. So it's just, I think it's just fun and it's something to geek out over. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sold for for convincing me. Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think we're out of time, and
All
I'm
right.
really, thank you for expanding on all of the questions that you did. It was really interesting to like hear your perspective on things, and even just your, personal connection to what you study. Like, just uh, thanks for again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say, like, to those who are at the co-op listening to this or watching this, I know most of the people who live here are undergrads and are still trying to figure out like what it is they want to do when they're done with undergrad. And I'm always more than willing to like help out undergraduates with trying to figure out what their career options are, or how to navigate the path to graduate school and whatnot. It's not an easy path, and most of us do not have family members who could show us the way and teach us how to do it, or have, old friends or connections on like, that can help us out with this sort of thing. So me being a first generation undergraduate, first generation graduate student, like I'm always eager to help out people, even with the simplest or what may feel like the dumbest of questions. I feel like I had great mentors, and I found great opportunities, and sometimes those things aren't that easy to find, and we just need a little guidance to figure that out.
That's amazing. So everyone listen, yeah, if you have any questions or need any sort of mentorship, Sal's here. So don't hesitate to reach out to him. Thank you for that. That's amazing. That's a wonderful resource that we can, have in our home. So
Right.
yeah. Yeah, well, a final thanks to you. And yeah, look forward to the next episode, which should be released in 2 weeks. All right. Bye. Thanks, everyone.